Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast post signing day show. I'm Matt Prehm, Eric Scopel, Jared Mack. On today's show, it's Thursday the 21st. And hey, look, there's still one more guy out there that Oregon's waiting to see if he commits to Oregon. There's actually more than that. But a majority of Oregon's class has signed 25 commits, 25 signed letters of intent. And now they'll wait the next couple of days to see if they add one or two more. But basically, Oregon's class is in. It's the best class in school history. We're going to break it down. Number 5 class in the country. We'll break that down. We'll also dive into just each position offensively and defensively. And we'll start right now with quarterback on the offensive side of the football. Just let's count. We have to count the portal guys. So it's 3. They didn't announce Dillon Gabriel. We do know he has signed though. They just didn't want to talk about transfers on the day of high school and JUCO guys. And want to take the attention away from that. But we do know Dillon Gabriel has signed. We do know Dante Moore has committed. We don't know if he signed or not, but he's committed. And then they've also announced the signing of 3-star quarterback Luke Moga. We'll start with Moga there because we've talked a lot about Moore and Gabriel already. But
right,
3-star kid from Sunny Slope, Phoenix, Arizona. A guy that's like the anchor of his track team this past spring. Widely athletic, and I it's not meant to be a deterrent, but he's a developmental guy. He's coming in to be developed, and if he plays at Oregon, it's going to be in 2, 3, 4 years down the road.
Yeah, I think he's pretty aware of the fact that immediate playing time isn't available, right? I mean, he's tweeted out the iron sharpens iron right after Dante Moore committed earlier this week. He knows Dillon Gabriel is here too. He knows 2, maybe 3 years from now is when his opportunity will arise, and even then, it's not clear. And to your point, Matt, like there were whispers out there probably in the last month that they were talking about, like, is he athletic enough to play a different position at some point? Like, if quarterback doesn't work out, could he play receiver? Could he play safety? I don't think that's what the plan is, but that's the type of athlete at least you're talking about. And you go watch the film, and like Dan said it, what really stands out is just his ability to run, like his ability to scramble and make things happen with his legs. Like he's special in that regard, and I think the arm talent is there, but you can also see that like there's some kind of mechanical stuff maybe, and I'm not a quarterback guru, so it's hard for me to like sit here and explain what I'm talking about exactly. But it doesn't. Maybe it's a little longer of a release, choppy of a release. I don't know the exact way of putting it. Maybe Jared can help out with that part, but regardless, he comes in here. He knows he's got some time to develop, and the passing part will come. And when it does, if it does, I guess I should say, you'd be looking at a really dynamic dual threat guy. Now, again, that's 3 or 4 years down the line from now. I think that's fine. And we will see what that development looks like. But athletically, he is going to separate himself from most prep quarterbacks you'll see coming into a program because he can really, really move.
And sometimes those are the things that you can't teach. You can't really teach the fact that he has this insane speed and is able to make people miss. Sometimes you can add to that, but it's kind of hard to just teach just insane speed, and that's what Luke Moga possesses. But that's clearly his best skill trait as of this point in his recruiting and his development as a player. He's going to need to work on himself as a quarterback because that's the position that he is. But again, this is a 17, 18-year-old kid for the duration of his Oregon commitment. And like a lot of 17 to 18-year-old quarterbacks, they struggle with doing some of the things that Luke Moga does as well. Reading a defense, deciding how to progress through his reads. Like the simple things you kind of take for granted when you have an elite quarterback at either the college or the NFL level. These are real problems that you have to develop and work through, similar to what Bo Nix showed at Oregon, even though he was a 4th and 5th year guy. Like he still developed into the point where he could read all the defenses and figure out what play to use and go through and progress through his reads at a fast rate. And, Moga, like you guys both said, this is going to be a 3 to 4 year deal. And if it's not, then that means that he's made a huge jump in development. And that would be obviously a very welcomed addition into the Oregon quarterback room, but they don't need him to necessarily be anybody who's going to perform in year 1 or year 2, and that's a nice thing. And for Moga, you know, that puts some pressure off of his shoulders because they don't need him to perform right away, and he knows this. And it's going to be a very intense, it's going to be a fierce quarterback room, just the way Oregon has recruited. They already have a guy in 25, so it's going to be competition year after year after year, and that's a good thing. And so I think it's obviously overall a very solid quarterback class, but I think that Moga is just a good developmental piece. And if he comes in and if he does anything in his 3rd or 4th year, I think that's considered a win.
All right, next up, one of the first guys to get his national letter of intent in, that was DeJuan Riggs, a running back from Washington, D.C., St. John's High School. This is a bigger back, 6 foot, 202 pounds already, a guy that's over 1,000 yards all purpose. And I think I didn't really put 2 and 2 together until close to signing day, but this is a guy that a little bit in terms of usage like Bucky Irving, someone that had 662 yards and 6 touchdowns rushing and then 26 catches. That's a lot for a high school running back. Almost 340 yards, 2 scores there. Just another interesting piece that comes from a long ways away, but it's maybe a diamond in the rough type guy.
Yeah, very explosive. I think that's what stands out. And to your point, like I kind of watched him and thought running back, but like maybe slot receiver is something that could happen. I'm not saying that's what will, but like he has that sort of skill set and those movement skills.
Right.
I think. Ooh, I'm the captain. Oh no, I was gonna say I was in the
Not
first
anymore.
chair for a second. No, I really like this prospect, and I'd like to talk to our ratings team because I'm just surprised he's this far down the pecking order to a certain degree. But that doesn't deter for me much of anything. I'm excited by this guy. I do think there's upside maybe as a return guy as well if you go watch what he does. And I also think he's probably similar to Moga, not somebody you're going to need to get much out of for a couple of years. And I think that's fine too. And I will be curious to see what happens with his body because he's kind of almost like a leaner 200 pounds. Like, I wonder if he could play at 215 and could keep some of that explosiveness and carry a little more power. Because you watch him now, he's more of a one cut, get up field, run away from people guy as opposed to a Jordan James, Bucky Irving, where they sometimes take on contact. But I really like the prospect. And again, I think the ranking doesn't match what I saw on film. Not that I'm a recruiting ranking expert.
Yeah, Riggs just, he played at St. John's Prep in Washington, D.C., the same high school that Colin Gill, Oregon's 2023 cornerback, went to. It's just not the best competition, and I think that's what really dings him. It's kind of similar to Moga and Sunny Slope, like it's not the best competition in the area, and he should be doing what he's doing to that kind of competition where he's like a one cut and runs away because he's going to Oregon. He's a top 800 player in the country. He has multiple Power 5 offers. Like that's the type of player that he should be. That being said, I do like what I see on tape from him. I think he's more like he's more like Noah Whittington to me in the fact that he is a bigger body, but is a little bit lighter, a little bit smaller than what Bucky Irving is. Although I think Whittington actually gained like 10 pounds this past offseason before being injured. But he has room to add to his frame. I think he's obviously more of a pass catcher than Whittington is and has more of those Bucky-like traits out of the backfield. But I think that he obviously is going to have time to develop. They have Jaden Lamar. They brought in Jay Harris, the transfer from Northwest Missouri State, who I think is going to be interesting. I don't know what to make of him, but I do really like his tape. But again, it's kind of the same thing. It's like he's playing against lesser competition. He played at the D2 level. Riggs is playing at lesser Washington, D.C. area high school level football. But I like his tape. I think he has a lot of good breakaway speed. I think he can be an impact guy. And I think you'd feel mildly comfortable if he had to come in his freshman year and do something similar to how you felt about Jaden Lamar. It's like it's running back, like just don't fumble the ball and then hit your cuts and go through the holes that the offensive line presents you, and you should be good. So I think it'll be a year or two until he starts to really make an impact on the Oregon team in general. But I really just honestly have to trust Carlos Loughlin at this point. He's done such a good job of finding talent, developing talent, how many fumbles the last 2 years on the running back room? One. It was Bucky Irving against Utah this year.
It's incredible. It's incredible.
It's very incredible. It's really good coaching and development by Carlos Lachlan. And that just kind of seems like another guy. You just kind of have to trust him until he produces a dud, to be honest with you, because he's done a really good job as a running back coach. So I'm excited to see what he looks like when he gets to campus. And honestly, probably during the spring game and probably against Hawaii when they go there and win by 48 points next year.
This is the year where it's definitely you have to trust in Laughlin's evaluation, because they've added two guys to the class. Riggs, who's a 3-star running back, that's the 68th best player at his position. And then the other player that they've added is a D2 All-American, but he's still D2, and Jay Harris from the transfer portal. It's probably not as sexy as maybe as people anticipated, maybe year 3 of Oregon football looking from a recruiting standpoint, but very productive. And to Jared's point, this is the year you have to just trust in the evaluation, which, like you said, like they've knocked it out of the park at this position and multiple other avenues of evals. All right, let's move over to wide receiver now. And this is one where there was some confidence maybe in March, April, that, hey, this is going to be a really good group. And then towards the end, after a couple decommitments throughout the season, one from Jordan Anderson, who was a 4-star receiver, late in the process, you're kind of like, are they really only going to sign one player? And 3-star Jack Ressler, a guy that had an up and down senior season at Mater Dei High School. Then they started bringing in some portal guys. Then those portal guys started going elsewhere. And then on signing day, we kind of got some clarity, probably why maybe they weren't as aggressive in the portal. And it's because 4-star receiver Jeremiah McClellan, who was previously committed to Ohio State, and then 4-star wide receiver Ryan Pelham, who was previously committed to USC, both flipped and signed. We should note that they signed with Oregon on National Signing Day. So now all of a sudden, a receiver room that looked like it was only going to have 1 days into National Signing Day has 3, and two of them are complete game breaker type guys. I like both players on film. McClellan probably is the one that could see the field sooner, but it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if Pelham is also on the football field in some capacity as a freshman during the 2024 football season.
And don't forget Dylan Gresham either.
Oh, yes. Dylan Gresham. Completely forgot it. That was as big of an important keep as it was signing those other guys. Wow. Completely omitted that guy.
I was just going to say, though, I think we should spend a little extra time here talking about the recruiting part of this as opposed to just the evaluations, because I think Junior Adams deserves a salary bump or something. I don't know, a major pat on the back from those of us who don't have the ability to impact how much money he makes, at least, because what a 24 hours for a junior. I mean, like Matt laid out, it was possible they were going to lose Gresham and not sign anybody besides Ressler, and instead they go out and they keep Gresham, hold him off. I know Arizona, USC were both he visited both those schools in the last 2 weeks. And then flipping McClellan from Ohio State, that just doesn't happen. You don't go to pick a guy from Ohio State who's a receiver who's this highly regarded. Just doesn't happen. And then, I'm going to spend a little extra second on this part because, A, it's a big deal that Ryan Pelham's joining the signing class, but also it just speaks to the shift in, further solidifies the shift in the recruiting landscape where Oregon on signing day is the one taking big-time players from USC, because if you're an Oregon fan, you've been a fan for a long time, there was just always a sense that if you were going a heads up with USC for a guy, I'm talking 5-10 years ago, you were going to lose. And USC could just kind of come in at the last minute, and it happened all the time. And they would just take the guy that Oregon was really, I remember Ray Malioga was a linebacker that was like, I think a 5-star recruit that was like the headliner of Oregon's class probably 12 years ago. And it didn't even seem like USC was interested in him. And then at the last minute they were, and they just grabbed him. Seemed like they started recruiting him a week before they flipped him, kind of deal. That's what used to take place. And it was pretty eye-opening to me that Oregon was able to get that done And to get both of these guys, and to the point we're about to make, like I think from an assessment perspective, these are really, really good receivers that both USC and Ohio State really coveted. So heck of a job by Junior Adams. I'll let Jared take over in terms of the player assessment part, but I just wanted to kind of acknowledge, like, great job by Junior, and then also just a sign of the changing landscape where Oregon's the one kind of coming in last minute, pulling a big time recruit from USC, and not vice versa, which had been the case for certainly all the way up until about 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, Junior's been great the last couple seasons that he's been at Oregon. Getting guys like Tez Johnson in the transfer portal, getting guys like Jurion McClellan, and then Pelham, Keegan Gresham. These are getting Kyler Casper originally in that 2022 cycle. He's been great. He honestly deserves a raise. Oregon would honestly probably like to keep him around for a couple more years at this point. But I really like McClellan. I like him a lot more than I like Pelham, but that's more of like a personal preference thing. I always like the bigger body receiver rather than a slot guy. I think they're just more important to an offense, similar to how Troy Franklin was this season. Obviously, Tez Johnson was great towards the stretch, and Oregon has an offense that will utilize a slot receiver better than most. But I think McClellan is similar in terms of potential productivity as freshman year as Jurion Dickey. It's just really interesting because Oregon only has like four wide receivers a year who play. But these guys are talented enough to see the field freshman year. It's just, will they understand the playbook? Will they understand the offense? Will they, get some weight up, transition themselves in the college football level, and then see the playing field over guys who are already in front of them? I think McClellan has a chance because Oregon's X receiver is pretty thin right now, and there's not really a good option to go and replace Troy Franklin. And maybe it is a combination of Jurion Dickey and Kyler Casper and McClellan as three guys who are relatively unproven, and they can formulate a way to win. But I like him. He's got above average speed. It's not breakaway speed. It's not Pelham speed, but he can surely take the top off when necessary. He's a bigger possession receiver. If Ohio State and Brian Hartline are going after you as a receiver hard, you're a good receiver. I mean, they've had such an elite track record over the last 7-8 years with receivers, and Hartline as their wide receiver coach. Like, you have to, this is like a blind trust in Ohio State, which is weird since we're covering Oregon, but you blind trust Ohio State when they take a wide receiver and they wanted McClellan bad. Pelham is just a slot guy. It's 5'11", 170 pounds, which I think is important for Oregon because Gary Brown Jr. is kind of a slot guy who played Z at points this season as well. They don't really have like a backup slot guy. It might be
Justice Lowe is who I would name.
Yeah, but he's kind of an X. He's kind of a Z. He kind of floats him around like he was playing Z during the spring game, which is really the only time where we really got to see him. But they lose Chris Hudson and Josh Delgado to the transfer portal, which I know were non-factors this past season, but those are your third string slot receivers behind Tez and Gary Bryant. So Pelham fills that role, and he's more than just filling of a role. He's a talented player in his own right. He's a top 100 recruit on the 247 Sports Composite, top 200 recruit in the top 247. Big get, obviously, over USC, but a guy who, possesses 11. I think he ran an 11.09 100-meter dash as a high school track guy. He's got the speed, he's got the wiggle, he's got the acceleration to be a really good slot receiver. But two big-time additions. And then Gresham is just – I'm not sure what position he's going to be on the field, but I think with like a year or two in a strength room, I think he can become another big body possession receiver. I like his length, I like his hands and his athleticism. He's just, I'm not sure where he's going to be on the field, but it'll either be X or Z. And I think he can be an impact guy in his year 2 or year 3.
Maybe it was just him just talking and not really meaning it, but Dan called him one of his favorite recruits. On Wednesday. Like, he doesn't do that though. Like, he doesn't really ever single out guys, and that's why I was going to just mention that. I thought that was interesting. And back to Eric's point, I actually had the same thought, Eric, about just where Oregon kind of is in the hierarchy of college football, because I was thinking of the Maualuga stuff that you were referencing, but also of like just the other fan base's perception kind of of what USC was like in 2000 to 2008 under Pete Carroll, where it was didn't really matter how many linebackers USC had. They always seemed to go at the last minute and steal one, and schools would always complain. And if you went and looked at Arizona's message boards on signing day when Gresham sent his letter of intent in, the reaction was, "What? Why is he going there? They already have 2 or 3 other receivers. They're loaded there. Why do they have to have another receiver? What is happening? Why can't Arizona get one?" And then, like to what you said about USC just coming in at the last second and just stealing one of the best players from your class, like that's what Oregon did to USC. And I had the same kind of just memory or thought of just this is different. This is unexpected, and it kind of just a sign of just where this program has come. I think all 3 guys probably see the field in some capacity, and I don't want to spend too much more time on this, but do we think they add a portal guy now? Looking at the numbers of the scholarships, looking at how many guys they've added, like I think they try, but I don't know if it's become a necessity now.
Unless Jerion Dickey is incredible in the bowl game, I still think you want to find somebody who used a reliable outside receiver. Because we should say Trayshawn and Gary are both back. Both those guys had moments, and they're both experienced, right? And that's kind of what you'd want. But I still think losing a player like Troy and either standing pat or expecting a redshirt freshman to really elevate to that level, I just think that's a big ask. That's a big ask to me. So I think you still look at the portal guy, but again, maybe Jerion has just made incredible strides and he's going to come out in the Fiesta Bowl and have 140 yards receiving. Everyone's going to say, "Oh, they're set." But outside of that, I think you still have to take a look. And I think adding at least one outside receiver is the minimum to me.
Yeah, like we've said on every single podcast of the offseason, like they need to add somebody to replace Troy Franklin. And it doesn't have to be exactly Troy Franklin because you're replacing like a 2nd-round pick, most likely in the NFL draft. But it needs to be somebody who's bigger bodied, who's a true X receiver who can get up and go get the ball and fill the role that Troy Franklin did. And maybe it's Dickey, but if it was, we would have seen him throughout the year. Like, I think it's just kind of as simple as that. Matt, I remember you at the beginning of the season saying 5-star receivers don't come here to sit for a season. And that's exactly what Jerion Dickey did. So, and obviously he was, rehabbing an injury that he came into college with and played in a couple games. But, it would probably be a lot to expect that he's going to come in and immediately fill that X position role. So that I still think they need to hit the transfer portal and really get an impact guy there. Because there's just too much, like I was going through with McClellan, there's too much uncertainty. There's a lot of question marks at the X position right now.
Now, moving just over to tight end, Oregon added a couple guys at this position. 4-star tight end Roger Salapaga. They also added AJ Pugliano. And Roger is one that I'm curious about because maybe this is a guy that he's rated as a receiver by 24/7 Sports. Maybe Oregon views him as that outside receiver, that bigger guy. He's 6'4", 222 pounds, so he's probably not nearly as fast as what Troy Franklin was, but it's an interesting discussion at least. Is this part of the solution? Is it not a solution? I don't know, but they've added 2. It's a position that Jared has talked about at length for needing multiple players. They've added 2, and we'll see if more come into the fold. We still don't know what Terrence Ferguson is choosing to be doing as well, mind you.
Yeah, that's a big question. I think Saliapaga is a long-term solution potentially as a hybrid player because I think he could play tight end or some sort of receiver. Like I hate to make the comparison because it's not a fair one at all, but like the Brock Bowers sort of role where it's like kind of like a hybrid position player. But Saliapaga is not a player that I think is going to be seeing the field right away. I don't feel that way really about Pugliano. I feel less confident about Pugliano probably making an impact soon than I do Saliapaga. I think this is a player who I'm talking about Saliapaga now, where I think he could be a really high-end receiving weapon at some point during his career, just because he's special with how he attacks the ball and the size and the skill set he has. My concern there is how he gets himself open, because I don't see that explosiveness. And certainly if we're talking about as a true outside receiver, that's a big part of that job. And I don't know if I see that sort of stuff there, which is why I think he's more of a tight end where you run him into situations where he has green grass or he has size advantages and you just throw it up to him, which is what he did a lot at Orem High School down in Utah. I really like the upside here, but I don't expect, like, remember Kenyon Sadiq, we were talking about last year, going kind of back to Jared's point of like what we were saying about true freshmen to start the season. We thought he was going to be a pretty big part of the offense, or at least a player who would play a decent amount. And by the second half of the season, he was only playing special teams, basically. So I don't have a ton of confidence that either of these true freshmen play much at all as true freshmen, unless Ferguson leaves and like Casey Kelly calls it a career and sort of the position group unravels. But as things are currently constructed, I think these are long-term ads, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if either or both players redshirted in 24.
Yeah, if the position group unravels, then they're just going to go get tight ends in the transfer portal, which is kind of similar to what they did last year after Cam McCormick and Malik Imadaval left. They needed just another bigger body guy. I expect both these guys to redshirt. I like Saliapaga. I think he's very clearly a tight end. I think that he just did, like Eric said, doesn't have the explosiveness or the agility or the acceleration to really be a threat on the outside. And like I was saying with Moga, like sometimes those are things that people are just, that's their God-given gift. It's their natural ability to be able to do that. It's not Saliapaga's. Like, will he get better at it in the strength and conditioning program at Oregon? Yeah, most likely. But he's going to be somebody who fills that Kenyon Sadiq role as a smaller, quote unquote, tight end that is more of a pass catcher who can block, who can do everything else, but it's going to be a similar type of player to Sadiq. Sadiq is the better athlete and the better size, and he has some of those acceleration tools where he could be like somebody who is actually using the perimeter. But I think they're going to be similar molds. I think Pugliano has the better frame to add more weight, become a guy who is like Patrick Herbert, that 6'4", 6'5", and can add to 240, 245. But obviously that takes some time. I think as a tight end group, this is fine. You have to add guys, and I think these can become contributors down the road. But going into freshman year, I think they're both going to redshirt, and that's fine, because at this point, you return Ferguson, you return Kelly, you return Herbert, you return Sadiq. That's solid, and I would expect Sadiq's development over the offseason that he's going to have a larger role and probably take some of those Herbert and Kelly snaps. So then 4 deep is exactly what you want. 6 scholarship tight ends. I mean, I'm a happy camper. So I think that's fine that they're going to redshirt. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that they both have upside in the future, but it's just not now.
Can I pose a quick question, Matt, really quick?
Yeah.
It stands out to me. I was just thinking this through as Jared was talking. Maringer seems to have a type. If you just look at the tight ends he's added from a prep level, like he's not going after, or at least they haven't signed the traditional Patrick Herbert or Terrence Ferguson sized players who are like 6'5", 6'6", and come in at 230, 240. Like, I don't know. It's kind of interesting to me looking at it now. The last 2 years, they've signed 3 tight ends, and they've all been kind of like 6'3", 220 to 230 guys who played tight end basically only as seniors in high school, or maybe not even at all, and primarily played receiver. I don't know. Just something to kind of think about. I don't know what that says necessarily. I mean, I guess it speaks to the value they see in receiving contributions out of the tight end room. But the last 3 guys they've signed at that spot are all similar physically and kind of have similar, I would say, things they need to work on, which is actually becoming a tight end and working on blocking. I don't know, just something that I thought of.
I wonder if that's part of the long-term plan of what this offense will be under. Like, obviously, Maringer was here before Stein was, but Stein, the tight end wasn't used nearly as often as it was here at Oregon at UTSA. So I'm wondering if it's just like if Oregon, even when Dan just got hired, his initial idea was we've got a lot of traditional tight ends on the roster. We'll use them, but we'll start phasing them out of the program because in 2 or 3 or 4 years, the offense will look drastically different and the usage of the tight end will look drastically different from what they're asked to do. Maybe that's an answer to your question. All right, let's shift over to now the offensive line, a position group where, excuse me, the Ducks were able to sign 4 guys. We should also note they added a transfer portal guy, so the number is actually 5. Um, 2 4-star prospects from the high school ranks, and one in which Shaq McRoy, they had to wait until signing day to see if he was going to stick with his longtime commitment or flip to the Colorado Buffaloes. He had taken an official visit a couple weeks prior to signing day. Ducks had to sweat that one out, but he very passionately made it clear he was not signing with Colorado on signing day, put the Colorado hat on, and then quickly, violently threw it off and then put the Oregon hat on. Massive human being, 6'8", 365 pounds. He's one of Oregon's highest rated commits on the offensive side of the football. Fox Crater is a U.S. All-American. He's also just outside the top 200, the 202nd best player, plays his prep football at Evergreen High School in Vancouver. And he's the starter of 3 linemen from basically Oregon. Devin Brooks from Clackamas, Trent Ferguson from West Salem, also signed with the Ducks, 2 3-star players. Ferguson's a long-term project. Devin Brooks is an interior offensive lineman. And then the portal ad was Matthew Bedford, who we've talked about, a multi-year starter coming out of Indiana.
I was saying this yesterday at the press conference. Can you imagine being 6'8", 365 as a teenager? I can't imagine being that large ever in life, but at that age, and you watch the tape and he carries it better than you could imagine. I mean, he is big and he's athletic. I mean, I think there's a ton to work on here technically, and these big guys oftentimes don't bend great and have issues with, I don't know, kind of getting out of their stances slow and getting overpowered by smaller players and stuff. So like there's certainly some technical stuff to work on, but just from a physical traits perspective, like this is about as good as it gets in terms of size, athleticism, feet, and what he could be. Because I'd imagine, and maybe I'll be wrong, I'd imagine this is a right tackle who you see playing closer to like 320, 330. I can't imagine they want him to stay over 350. That's just humongous. You see some players like that, but not a lot. But this is a guy who it's not going to be in 2024 where he's a starter, but it could be as soon as 2025. Like he could be on the Josh Connerly, Iapani Lalalu kind of plan, where as a true freshman he plays a fair amount, and then a sophomore a starting job opens and he fills it. That's an outcome I could see here, and I don't typically say that about offensive linemen, but I do really like what I see from him. And then the in-state trio, if you will, I like all these guys. Actually, I think Brooks is the player, strangely, just watching the film, that for whatever reason I kind of gravitate to most, just because I think he's really explosive and has a strong core for an inside lineman, 6'4", 290 already. Again, not expecting any of the other 3 to probably play super soon, but I could see Brooks being somebody who we look back in a couple of years and say, oh, wow, he's like a rotational guy as a redshirt sophomore. And after that, maybe he's a starter. I see the upside there of just his physical traits, I think, will translate. And it's not anything flashy, but he's big, strong, and athletic. And 6'4", 290 doesn't hurt coming out of high school. So I like all 3 of these guys from an in-state perspective. Ferguson's going to be one that's interesting to see develop, because that's a guy who maybe you don't hear a peep from until year 4 or 5, even, just because he has a lot of work to do to kind of figure out this stuff. Again, if you don't know the story, a basketball player, lacrosse player, as Dan said on signing day special, who's now kind of focusing his attention on football the last couple of years.
Yeah, I like this group. McCroy obviously is the guy who leads it the way. He reminds me of George Silva, but he's 18. George Silva was 19 or 20 coming into college, lost a bunch of weight. Oregon listed him at 6'7", 320. So to Eric's point, this is not a guy you want in the 360s. You want him down to that 320, maybe 330, but most likely 320, 315. And he has the frame to do it. I really like watching his tape. He's really fluid and athletic for a guy of his size and, frankly, magnitude. Everybody's seen the clip of him on Twitter of him catching the 2-point conversion. Like, that's the type of athleticism, and he's probably carrying too much weight. And you get him in for a full off season in a weight room with Coach Love, like I've talked about before. You add to his strength. You add to his athleticism, you add to his footwork by being lighter weight. He's a guy who, like Eric said, could be a real contributor in 2025, and could certainly see the playing field this year if it's just for 4 games to keep his redshirt season. For the other guys, I really like what I see from Ferguson, but again, he's a guy who's going to be a developmental player, kind of like Moga, kind of like maybe Pugliano in a couple of years, who needs to learn how to play the position more, but he's got like natural athleticism that I think is a good, kind of like a lottery ticket to take. Kind of similar to what, Oregon did with their offensive line in 2022, where it was a lot of guys who were like 3-star recruits. You kind of take like a little lottery ticket, get them some development with some real teachers. Same with the 2019 team, where it's like, and again, a lot of 3-star kids, a lot of lottery tickets who have some good natural abilities, like their athleticism, and then they fully develop into 4-year starters. But I think Fox Crater is another guy who I'm really high on. I like Brooks too. I think he's just a guard. That's what he's going to be, and that's okay. He's going to be a full-time guard at the college level.
Yep.
And he plays physical, and I like that. He reminds me of a dude who I think like Mario Cristobal would love. He's just a physical guard, and that's fine by me. But Crater is really interesting to me because I think he does a really good job, and I think he's undersized. Even though he's 6'6", he's sitting there like 270, 285. And you put 20, 30 more pounds on the reverse of McCroy, that's a really good size tackle. And worst case, I think that's a really good size guard because he has the athleticism. I'm not sure if he has the agility, the acceleration to really move around on the outside, but I really like him as a prospect. And I thought he improved a lot from we saw him like junior year at Saturday Night Live, or going into his junior year. And then watching his senior film, I thought he improved a lot from that. So I think it's a good group. I think it's very solid that Oregon's keeping some kids at home and in the general area, and then McCroy is kind of the cherry on top.
It happened so long ago that I think a lot of people forget Crater's commitment. He committed very early in the process for Oregon, and then Oregon had to sweat out him taking official visits to Oklahoma and USC. They had to sweat him out going down to Texas for a visit and being really serious with them. They had to sweat out a Georgia visit and dealing with that one as well. All these schools have offered him, by the way. LSU offered him a scholarship. We know A&M offered him a scholarship. Washington offered him a scholarship. He committed so long ago. This is one that if all these visits and all these discussion points happened in September, October, November, and he committed at some point following, the middle of November up until signing day, this would be like lauded as one of the biggest gets of the class, just because of who they had to compete against, who they had to fend off to keep his commitment. But because it happened all the way back in February to like April or May, it's kind of forgotten about. Like, I think this is a really big deal for Oregon. It's a tackle that, frankly, I don't know. I was going to ask you guys this question too. Like, do we think any of these offensive linemen, excluding Bedford, because he's going to play, probably even start, do we think these guys at all carve out a role as true freshmen, or do we look at the depth chart that they've got and say they're good with Ope, they're good with Dave O'Yuli, they're good with maybe Janoris Wilson or Nashad Strother, they're good with Kawika Rogers, and just redshirt all 4 of these guys? Or does one or two maybe find their way into the depth chart in some capacity? They're not going to start. That's
no one's starting. Yeah, no one's starting. Ferguson's definitely a red shirt. I think Brooks is a red shirt. I think Crater's a red shirt. I think McCroy is the only one where I could see if he really fixes. I don't want to say fixes because that makes it sound like he's broken. But if he really reconstructs his body and gets to a place where he's healthy, I could see him pushing to be one of the first tackles off the bench, kind of a spot. But I also think it's probably too much to ask for him to exactly be the Josh Connerly thing where he is the 6th lineman immediately. I'm not sure, but I'd say probably not, but McCroy would be your best bet. I do think, as I said earlier, McCroy could be a guy who's looking at a starting spot as soon as 25 just because of the way the roster works out. But I don't know. I guess the question is, like, do you think McCroy could be better than Silva, Rogers, and Feope right away? And I don't know if the answer is a resounding yes to me, but I think there's a possibility.
I think they all redshirt. I think it's a resounding no that he's better than the three that you mentioned. I think Silva, Feope, and Kavika Rogers are all better than him going into his freshman year. I mean, they all have years of experience on him. They all have more college-ready bodies. And Kavika was the highest tackle off the bench, more than Silva and more than Feope. So I think it's way more likely that he redshirts than um, finds a role and uses up his red shirt. I think he'll play in games. Don't get me wrong, but I think that all four of them redshirt. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be some departures from the offensive line room after the bowl game, but who knows? I just think that they all redshirt.
I'll be the opposite. I'll say one of them plays, and it'll be one of the tackles, Crater or McCroy. But I don't think it's going to be 13 games. It'll be like 6 or 7 games. And maybe it's injuries that force one of them on. I mean, Oregon was extremely lucky this past season with injuries up front along the offensive line. All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll dive into the defensive side of the football for Oregon's 2024 recruiting class. All right, welcome back to the Autzen Audibles Podcast. This is going to be a long podcast, so strap in because we're 40 minutes in. We're just now touching on defense. Defensive line, front seven. Yet again, surprise, surprise, Dan Lanning loaded up, and as he should. But there are more guys coming to the defensive line, and it's headlined by a couple 5-star players. Aiden Breland is Oregon's highest-rated commit, the 16th best player in the country, the number 1 player in the state of California, the 4th best defensive tackle defensive lineman, I should say, in the country. We'll also touch on players that signed with Oregon up front, which includes Zaydian Sims, a 4-star defensive lineman from Durant, Oklahoma. Tion Gray, 3-star defensive lineman from Hazelwood Central High School in Missouri. Edge players includes 5-star Elijah Rushing, former Arizona commit who committed during the season to the Ducks, 17th best player in the country, the number 2 player at his position nationally, and also another player out of the state of Arizona on the edge, and that's Jackson Jones, a sack specialist from Yuma Catholic, a very small school in eastern Arizona. 5 guys up front for the Ducks, and probably not done yet. We're waiting on Jericho Johnson's commitment, and by the time you listen to this, maybe it's Friday, and potentially probably committed to the Oregon as well.
Yeah, Jericho's announcing fairly late Thursday evening. I think it's 7. You guys can correct me if I got that wrong, but I'm just going to lump him into this group because I think the odds are pretty high. I love this class. I think this is awesome. To go out. I mean, it was one of the questions I asked Dan. But thank you again, Coach Lanning, for jumping on the pod on Wednesday during a very busy day. We really appreciated that. But just the fact that they are, with Johnson in the fold, would have the 3 best defensive linemen on the West Coast. That's dang impressive. I know USC and UCLA and Washington, some of the other schools here aren't at the same, I don't want to say recruiting level, but they're kind of finding their footing right now, and Oregon's maybe taking advantage of some of that. But that's not a thing that really happens where you get all the good defensive linemen on your coast in one cycle. And I love the fact that you could play all 3 of those guys together really easily because they all play very different positions. Like Jericho Johnson is going to be a straight up nose tackle. Like I think we list him at 300 pounds, but I remember Huffman was on in the last couple months and said he thought he was closer to like 330. So this is a big boy. Aiden Breland is, I think, kind of like a Brandon Dorless type of player long term in terms of there's going to be some positional versatility. I don't know if he's ever quite athletic enough to do some of the stuff Brandon did in terms of standing up on the outside, but even if he's just like a traditional defensive tackle primarily, like he's going to be a game wrecker. He is so athletic and can really just run through players, and we'll see how much of that translates. And then rushing is And Jones, I like both those guys as pass rushers. Like Jones obviously doesn't have the same physical tools Rushing has. I mean, Rushing is going to be a guy who at Oregon's probably playing at 6'6", 275, 280, which is just primo size and athleticism for that edge kind of a spot. So I love all of that. Again, I think Jackson Jones is quietly really, really good. And I don't know if there's immediate playing time to be had, in part because this last class had 3 guys who played immediately. And is he better than any of those 3 guys? But I think it's a heck of a haul. And you see what you're building here now, stacking back to back classes where you went and hit really, really heavy on the defensive line. And you can retain this group and build around them for 2 or 3 years. Like Oregon could have a really, really dominant, kind of almost homegrown defensive front come 2025, come 2026. And that would be obviously really significant going into the Big Ten, where you're going to be playing in the trenches. And I think, Dan has kind of downplayed some of, at least with some of the interviews he did yesterday, the impact of going to the Big Ten in terms of the strategy of recruiting, of needing to get bigger boys and everything. But it's pretty clear that they're going to be set up well for that component of playing in the Big Ten with the way they're recruiting in the trenches.
Yeah, this class, I mean, it really doesn't get much better on the defensive front. Obviously, all the 5 stars, but there's the loads of talents. Xavier Sims, #1 player in Oklahoma. Tioni Gray is another bigger body who could develop well. He could develop into somebody like a Keon Ware-Hudson, who's maybe not the star of the show, but he's certainly going to help you down the line, especially in the Big Ten, like Eric just ran through. I mean, my favorite guy in this class has to be Rushing. At least for the defensive front, I have like a fan favorite. My Blake purchase of this year is going to be later on in the show, but Rushing is just a monster physically. You look at his stats, and the stats show up. But he should be doing that against the type of competition he's playing. Like this goes to my earlier point about DeJuan Riggs and the competition he plays. Although Elijah Rushing plays better competition, he plays some of the better high schools in Arizona, but he is one of the more physically gifted players we've seen in a long time. I'm not sure if there's anybody I can directly compare him to that has crossed paths at Oregon in the last couple of years, because I guess he kind of fits the Kayvon Thibodeau billing, but I think Kayvon Thibodeau was like one of the all-time athletes to ever come through Oregon. But same idea where he comes in that 6'5", 6'6" frame, and is going to be able to add another 20 pounds to his frame and be in that 270 range, like Eric talked about. And then Breland on the interior. This is an excellent class, and the assumption is that Jericho Johnson joins it, and that makes it even better. I don't think that there's ever been a talent. Bringing together of talent like Dan Lanning just did in this defensive class at Oregon ever. And they're all going to be really impact guys. I don't know if it's just going to be – I don't know how much of an impact it'll be in year one, except for a couple of guys. But like Eric mentioned, down the line, 2-3 years of development, I guess what would that be, like the 2028 NFL draft? Like there should be some names under consideration of going for sure from this class if they all stick around.
I think Rushing is going to have a very similar career arc to what a Kenny Rowe had at Oregon. And the fact that Rowe showed up in 2007, he was like, that was the time when top 200 players committing to Oregon was a really big deal. Yeah. And he was one of those guys. And he was a defensive end. It was a guy that one of the very early wins over USC. And you saw him as a freshman, and it was like, he's going to have a really good career. But as a freshman, he had basically one job. And it was, I'm going to be an elite pass rusher. I'm going to play in every single game, but it's going to be limited snaps. But I'm going to make plays when I do get on the field. He had 5 sacks out of 8 total tackles in 13 games as a freshman. And Rushing is obviously bigger than what Kenny Rowe was. Rowe was a 6'3", 210-pound defensive end. But I think you look at Kenny Rowe's career path, and he ended his career with 23.5 sacks. He's one of Oregon's best defensive ends ever. I'm not going to say Rushing is going to end up being, Oregon's best defensive end, but that's kind of be the career path for him of you have one specific role as a true freshman in 2024, and then it expands a little bit in 2025. And to what Jared said, maybe in 2026 or 2027, your opportunities to do everything are very, are endless, and you're asked to do a whole bunch of stuff within the defense as an upperclassman. And I think that's probably going to be said for a lot of these guys, that they're going to have one specific role if they play as true freshmen in 2024, but it'll expand as the years go on.
It's funny you brought up Kenny Rowe's name, because I thought of him watching Jackson Jones's tape a little bit, just because they're both a little undersized, like about the same size, 6'3", about 220. I get your point, though, in terms of the career arc. I think that's a fair point. I just think I thought of him as well with Jackson Jones in terms of the physical tools.
Yes, and Jackson fits that way better than rushing, because rushing is 6'6", 245 right now. That's an entirely different body type than what Rowe was coming in. All right, let's now move to linebacker, a position where the Ducks have been able to sign some players, a lot of players, for the number of guys that play in this position. 4. Braden Platt is the highest rated player from Yelm, Washington. He's almost a top 50 player in the country, the 53rd best prospect nationally, the number 1 player in the state of Washington. Kamar Mothudi, a top 200 player overall. Kingston Lopa from Grant Union High School in Sacramento. He's rated as a linebacker by 24/7 Sports, but he could play other positions. We'll touch on him here in a second. And then Dylan Williams, former USC commit early on as an underclassman, flipped his commitment in the summertime, or I think the springtime or so, to the Ducks. A 4-star guy from Long Beach Poly High School. This is a really good group. A bunch of different body types, a bunch of different types of linebackers. And frankly, it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if all 4 of these guys have some kind of significant role within 2 years of being on campus at Oregon. And the wild card, the interesting one, and let's start with it, is Lopa. Where does he fit? What does he play? He's ultra versatile. I think, Eric, you asked him, Dan, about that. It's an interesting case study that they're going to do with this guy.
Yeah, it sounds like he's a safety to start. He spoke about the fact that they did have positional versatility there, talked about how he was a good wide receiver in high school as well, said he could also probably play some of that star position, which kind of interests me, of like a 6'5", let's say he's 210 and he's playing star. Like, that's kind of an intriguing possibility. I mean, we maybe want to talk about him more in the safeties, defensive backs group. I don't know, but I mean, if we're doing it now, he's one of my favorite. He's one of my guys. Like, he's one of my favorite players to watch if you just go watch the film, because he just wrecks people with his size and explosiveness and his desire to decleat and just smash into people at full speed. Like, there's a lot of stuff to like with him. Very intriguing in terms of the fact that he could play different spots, but I think Dan made it pretty clear he's a defensive back.
He's a safety,
to start his career, and we'll see if that changes. To the other guys, I mean, Braden Platt, my gosh, like, that probably is my favorite tape to watch in this class, from the defensive side, I guess, specifically. Like, he is really, really well. He physically already looks like a guy who could play, just based upon size, explosiveness, understanding of what he's doing, how he brings players down, and the consistency with which he does that. I'm a big Braden Platt guy, and we'll see how the linebacker rotation kind of sorts itself out. But there could be available playing time for him sooner than later if you just kind of look at it and figure, okay, assuming Jeff and Justin are both back, those are your top 2 guys. There's a couple of guys behind him who have played a decent amount, but I'm not sure if anyone's popped enough where you're like, oh, they're the number 3 or the number 4 guy for sure. Like, I don't know, Jared, do you think Devin Jackson is 100% ready to be the number 3? Or
I mean, he was number 4 basically all season long with Bryce Betcher. And they had Jerry Mixon as well. I just think that there's 4 or 5 solid linebackers in front of all of these guys. But I see your point with Platt. I really like him as well. I think he needs to lose a little bit of weight. I think he's almost probably a little too big to run the linebacker scheme that Oregon wants him to run, kind of like that Noah Sewell role, where he's really good going north to south, but you need to go east to west in this defense, which is why I think Kamar Mathudi is a guy who could excel. I don't think any of these guys are really going to play too terribly much, barring injuries, their freshman season. I don't really think that's a bad thing. Dan did mention the opportunity for these guys to play special teams in his press conference, which could make them lose their red shirt this year if they do play special teams. But as far as linebackers go, I still think that the 4 or 5 that Oregon has already, that you got to get over that hump. And maybe Platt takes the Bryce Betcher role. But I thought Bryce was fine. I thought he was a little bit above average in his limited role as more of just a straight run-stopping linebacker rather than putting him into coverage. But I still think Devin Jackson is there. I thought Devin was much better this season than he was last year. I think he got plenty of reps and showcased his speed and athleticism. I still think that he can perform well in that money linebacker position. But Platt he's a MAC linebacker all day, and he could potentially fill in for Jacobs in 25 easily.
I just think at a certain point, some of the talent will rise to the top. And I know true freshmen, it's hard to project some of it, but we did just come off a year where a lot of true freshmen actually played. And I do think some of these guys are good enough to make contributions right away. And that's the hard part, though, is we're talking about this today, and who knows how this is going to shake out and will happen from a portal perspective. But Platt's a guy that I think could contribute day one. Now, what role is that? I'm not sure. But I also, I don't know, I wasn't maybe as high on Betcher's play. And Devin was kind of dinged up at times. So I think there's a real possibility Platt plays. Now, that doesn't mean he's going to supersede those guys right away, but I think the talent is available there.
I think the backups that Oregon has returning at the linebacker position have the upper hand on these freshmen, but I don't think the returners are above and beyond better than these guys that they're just automatically going to get the job. Like, they're going to have to go out and fall camp and spring football and the offseason work and fend these guys off. And most of them probably will. Maybe one emerges from the 4 and plays as a true freshman in some role. But I don't think any of the backups behind Bassa and Jacobs have shown us where we definitively are like, yes, that guy is the number 3 clear-cut guy. I think and that's the thing wrong, in my opinion. That's not a bad thing. But I think the door's open. And this is what you do when you get to this level of football. You recruit elite players every single year, and everyone has to fight for a job. No, it doesn't matter how good you were the year before.
Yeah. Again, this goes to relying on true freshmen to be immediate impact guys. And like you said, Matt, they got to go through fall and spring and go through the waiver room. The nice thing for the returners is that they've done it for 2 or 3 years. Like, all the freshmen have to go and do it themselves this time around. I'm not saying any of these guys won't be immediate contributors. I just think that there's only a couple. I think there's really like one spot to fill, because I liked what I saw from Jerry Mixon as well. I think he could be a guy that's a bigger contributor next year that takes over that Bryce Betcher role, because he came in at 225 pounds as a true freshman, or at least he was listed at like 220. So you add another 10, 15 pounds onto him, and he takes that backup MAC linebacker role. Well, Devin Jackson returns at the money. So I just think that there's a lot of talent now in that linebacker room, considering where they were 2 seasons ago. And bringing in 3, again, really talented linebackers in their own right certainly helps.
All right. Secondary, do we want to go cornerbacks only and then safeties, or do we just want to lump them all together?
Let's lump them.
Okay.
Yeah, we can lump them all.
They've signed 4 technically at this position, 5 if we want to count Kingston Lopa. 24/7 Sports has Lopa rated as a linebacker. That's why I included him.
He's rated as a safety too. I think either the top 247 or the composite has him as a linebacker for some reason. It's weird.
But nonetheless, they've got 4 or 5 guys. 5 guys. Lopa, Dakota Fields is a top 100 guy, a player that committed to USC during the high school summer season of the senior year, and then flipped to Oregon. Aaron Flowers is an elite safety from Texas, almost a top 100 prospect. Sione Lalue, I think that's how you say his name. I completely butchered it probably. JUCO player, the number 2 player in the country at the JUCO position, 6'4" cornerback. Really interesting there. I'm just going to say iffy on this one. Cornerback from Baltimore, St. Francis Academy, another 4-star guy. And then on signing day, Dan didn't talk about it, but on signing day, they got a verbal commitment from Kobe Savage, all Big 12 conference player from Kansas State. So a unit that has a lot of bodies coming in, some immediate impact guys. I think there's probably 2 of them here that we could say good chance that they're starting or they're the first guy off the bench at their position, plus an opportunity, frankly, for all of them to play some kind of role as true freshmen, maybe.
Kobe Savage is a plug and play starter at one of the safety spots. I think we kind of already touched on that earlier in the week when it looked clear that was going to happen. I don't know if we have to touch on him any more than that. Sayone Laulea. I don't know how to pronounce these Polynesian last names. Laulea.
It's Laulea.
Yeah.
Laulea.
Laulea. I think he's got a really good chance to compete for starting reps somewhere in the secondary. I tried to get Dan to talk about positionally where he worked, and I don't know if he totally took that question head on. Instead, he kind of gave us a background on Laulea. But 6'4", moves really, really well. We already talked about it. Was a big-time JUCO prospect. Oregon needs help at basically corner and safety. Regardless of where he ultimately winds up, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's cross-trained because they do that with pretty much all of these guys. And I think Dan even alluded to that point during the answer, or maybe it was the Lopa answer. I think he's a contributor immediately, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's a starting corner or if he's a starting safety or wherever he fits. But I think you bring in a player like this and you hope that he's ready to go. Now, Oregon with the JUCOs doesn't always work immediately. Like we thought George Silva would probably play some kind of a role last year, and he didn't. But I and even like a TJ Bass took a year to get there. But I really like Laulea and the upside he provides. And then I'll let Jared talk more about the 2 prep players that we haven't really gotten into, Fields and Flowers. But those are elite athletes for their positions and players who probably don't start, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if either of them are like having a Jaleel Florence true freshman season in 2022 or a Cole Martin true freshman season in 2023, where they are in the rotation getting opportunities to prove themselves, and then the following year it kind of opens up even more. So I think both of those 2 guys will find a way to make contributions, in part because the secondary has some talented players at the top, but there's a lot of question marks behind them. And a lot of the guys you're looking at that they'd be contending with for reps are also guys who really haven't proven a lot to this point.
Yeah, it was certainly a good class to get a lot of secondary help when you have a lot of secondary question marks. Dakota Fields is the highest rated cornerback that Oregon is bringing in this year. Flowers is the highest rated safety. Fields is 6'2", 185, which is like you look at Oregon's last couple classes under Dan Lanning and who he likes at the cornerback position. That's it. It's that 6'2", 190-pound role with length and athleticism. Usually a track guy, which Fields was. I would expect Fields to have a very similar position if Dale and Austin were healthy this past season. I think he would have been a guy who burns his red shirt, who comes in, whether it just be special teams or not, but who certainly makes an impact somewhere on the field. Aaron Flowers could potentially be that too. I still think Oregon needs to look at going into the transfer portal for another safety or 2, and maybe even a cornerback if they can land one of the elite ones, because – again, you don't want to over-rely your defense on true freshmen because it could work, but there's a better chance of it not working. There's not a lot of teams that do that on a day-to-day basis, but Flowers at safety could certainly be an option. I really like Flowers' film. Dan went into him a lot in his press conference. I think he's an underrated player. I think he had offers from some of the best teams in the country, like a lot of these cornerbacks did and safeties did. But I really like what I see from him. He could be a guy who's an immediate impact at the safety position, similar to what Cole Martin was this year, assuming that Cole Martin is a guy that starts next season, which could happen and could not happen. We won't know until probably next year, the first game of the year, because we won't be able to see anything during fall camp. But Cole Martin certainly put himself in a good position to be one of those guys next season. And as far as the other corners, do you want to jump into that too? As far as the other corners, Ife Obadegwu is my guy. That's my Blake purchase of the year. That's my Devin Jackson of 2 years ago of the year. I really like his tape. The only thing that concerns me with him is just his kind of natural athleticism and his bend. I think sometimes he kind of has stiff hips. It's the casualty of tour that claimed Triquest Bridges a few times these past couple of years. But man, I really like him. He comes downhill. He hits hard from the cornerback position. He played at SFA, St. Francis Academy in Baltimore, and that's a place that usually faces off against some of the best high school competition in the country. So Obadegwu is my guy. I think he's the most physically imposing cornerback that's coming into this class. I think he'll make an impact, but I'm not a coach.
It's kind of silly, very simple to say, but this is a really good job. And we talked about Junior Adams. We talked about Junior Adams needing a pay raise. Like Meat went out and Demetrius Martin did a really good job of landing the corners, and Chris Hampton, Oregon's safeties co-defensive coordinator, the safeties that he was able to add to this mix. They've definitively added at least one starter to the unit in Kobe Savage. And at minimum, they've added 4 or so, 5 guys that could have some kind of role in 2023. And when you add guys that, whether they're freshmen and they're special teams guys, and maybe they're the 5th cornerback that plays during games, like that's still a valuable piece and a big deal to add in one single season. So I think as much as we praise Junior, and much deserved, I think Demetrius Martin and Chris Hampton, Oregon's 2 safety or defensive back coaches, also should get a shout out, because this is a really good group that doesn't get nearly as much attention as the defensive line does.
Can we give Tony Tuioti some credit too?
Yes, absolutely. The entire staff has done a really good job.
Yeah. Alik Terry. I'm
just going to start naming people now.
I'm just going to name all the coaches. Alik Terry. Tosh Lupoy. His involvements were pretty significant. This defensive class is awesome, just top to bottom. You look at it, you could build a pretty fascinating 11-player lineup out of this. And it would be a lineup that I'm not saying you would be able to play by any means now, but like if you were to fast forward the picture 2 years in the future and say, these are your 11 guys, and you expect the sort of development you would for these sort of prospects, you would be like, yeah, that's a pretty darn good group. Like that's the type of thing you see here. They hit every position on defense. They really did. Mm-hmm. And they hit most of them multiple times with high-end talent. So be excited. This defensive class is really, really awesome. And like, I guess just parting thoughts I had yesterday, and maybe I'm drinking the Kool-Aid, but this is the type of recruiting class, and you stack it with the last couple, that put you in a position to compete for the ultimate prize. I'm not saying that you're going to win a national championship right now. That's hard to project and all that, but these are the type of classes you sign when you put yourself in position to make those kind of leaps, because this is a top 5 class for a reason. And again, they hit every position on defense. They added somebody at every position on offense. There are a couple spots there where I'm not sure if there's a ton of immediate contributors, which I don't know if you need. But this is a really, really deep class that addressed a lot of needs with really high-end talent. So, and I don't know, we'll see how many guys play next year. This past season, it was close to 10 guys that were playing significant snaps. I wouldn't be surprised if this class is that and a little bit more, just because it's a 25, maybe 26 player class if they do sign Jericho Johnson. There's just a lot of things to like about this class. So I know that's not breaking any news, but I'm sure Oregon fans are really thrilled right now with the direction of where this class takes them.
This is what you need to do to hit the next level. This is what Georgia and Alabama have done and Ohio State have done for years now. That's what Texas A&M tried to do. Didn't really work there. They didn't have the coach. But when you have the coach, when you have the facilities, when you have the support from your donors and your university, like Dan Lanning does have here at Oregon, This is what you have to do. You have to stack these recruits on top of each other. And everybody will argue that stars don't matter because an outlier team got in the college football playoff last year in TCU or something like that. But they do. If you look at the blue chip ratio, happens every year, 24/7 sports. It's like a proven pattern that the more blue chips you have on your roster, the better your odds are of getting to the college football playoffs. And Dan Lanning is trying to do that. He's trying to get as many blue chip guys as he can on this roster after the transfer portal season and guys coming in and out. I'll be very interested to see what that blue chip ratio is because there are a lot of blue chippers in this class.
I guess my last parting thought, Oregon signed more 5-star recruits than Alabama in this cycle, which
That'll do.
Didn't think that ever would be a sentence we would say. Pretty, and in it, you could argue, well, it's the composite, and the composite Oregon's 5 stars, Rushing and Breland are no longer 5 stars, so maybe that inflates the number. And if you go to just our rankings, 24/7 Sports, it's still the same because Breland and Rushing are 5 stars, and Oregon has 13, Alabama has 12.
You're talking 4 stars, right?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. I think you said 5
Yeah,
stars.
I was like, Yeah, you said 5 stars. It's like 3 is more than 2.
Breland and Rushing go back to being 5 stars with just our rankings.
Right.
That just tells you where this class is at. To what Jared said, like this is this next step, the next evolution, the next tier you had to get to, and they've done it now once. Can they do it again and again? Because that's what makes you go from every 4 or 5 years, having a roster that could be constructed to compete for a title, to having one every single year that can compete for a title. And that'll be the question. All right, that's going to do it for us on this longer edition of the Autzen Audibles podcast. Thank you for listening. We'll be back potentially next week, hopefully sometime next week. Jared and I will head down to Scottsdale for coverage of the Fiesta Bowl. We'll start diving into that a little bit next week as well here on the podcast, and more recruiting fallout from what could potentially happen down the road the next couple of days for the Ducks. But until then, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.